Welcome to the program. I'm Joker Rogers. Ethiopian government forces and their allies have captured Shire, one of the biggest cities in the northern region of Tigray. From regional forces, they have been battling on and off since late 2020. The violence in Tigray, which has spilled over into neighboring regions and drawn in the Eritrean military, has killed thousands of civilians, uprooted millions, and left hundreds of thousands now facing possible famine. The conflict stems from grievances rooted in periods of Ethiopia's turbulent past, when the particular regional power blocks held sway over the country as a whole, and intentions over the balance of power between the regions and the central state. Shire is about 140 kilometers northwest of Tigray's regional capital, Mekelle, and hosts tens of thousands of people displaced from other areas of the conflict. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary General is warning that the situation in Ethiopia is spiraling out of control and violence and destruction have reached alarming levels. Speaking to journalists in New York, Antonio Guterres lamented the ripping apart of the social fabric. The Secretary General noted that hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes since hostilities resumed in August, many of them for the second time.
The situation in Ethiopia is spiraling out of control. Violence and destruction have reached alarming levels. The social fabric is being ripped apart. Hostilities in the Tigray region of Ethiopia must end now, including the immediate withdrawal and disengagement of Eritrean armed forces from Ethiopia. There is no military solution. Civilians are paying a horrific price. Indiscriminate attacks, including in residential areas, are killing more innocent people every day, damaging critical infrastructure and limiting access to vital services. Hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes since hostilities resumed in August, many of them for the second time. The United Nations is ready to support the African Union in every possible way to end this nightmare for the Ethiopian people. We need the urgent resumption of talks towards an effective, lasting political settlement. And the international community must rally together now for peace in Ethiopia. Civilians must be protected, and so too humanitarian workers who are being attacked and even killed delivering life-saving humanitarian aid. The level of need is staggering. The problem with wars is when both sides think they can win the war. And we have had episodes in which both sides have affirmed that conviction.
Elsewhere, Sudan's main political coalition has presented its vision for a fully civilian-led authority to lead a transition to elections. This follows stepped-up efforts to end an 11-month-old stalemate between the ruling military and pro-democracy forces.
Forces of Sudan and the Forces of Freedom and Change (FFC) coalition, derailing a transition to democratic elections and plunging the country into political and economic turmoil. Nearing the anniversary of the takeover, the military has not yet succeeded in naming a prime minister. However, this summer, military leaders say they intend to exit politics. FFC leaders said they had been informed the military had accepted a draft constitution circulated by the Sudanese Bar Association that would allow for civilian rule.
There must be a limited sovereign civilian level. It will be honorary without executive or legislative powers, and it will be the supreme commander of the armed forces. But this sovereign level, with limited member, should be made of civilians. Also, a fully civilian cabinet, headed by a prime minister from the forces of the revolution, with real powers and tasks separated by the transitional constitution that was issued by the Bar Association. Also, a legislative council in which there will be diverse participation and which represents the plurality and diversity of Sudan, with participation of the resistance committees, the forces of the revolution, and with proper representation of women, political forces, and different social groups.
In a statement, the FFC presented its vision for what the coalition will seek in any future agreement with the country's military rulers. In a proposal likely to draw criticism from protest groups, the transitional authority will include the participation of rebel groups to remain in government following the coup, political parties from outside the FFC who participated in writing a draft constitution, and union and protest groups. Under the FFC's vision, the military will exit politics and the country's cabinet, while Sudan's Sovereign Council, which had served as Sudan's collective head of state, will be fully civilian and chosen by revolutionary forces.
We believe there can be no democratic transition in Sudan without addressing the issue of the plurality of armies through a reform process that leads to a single professional national army that distances the military institution from politics, battlefields, and partisan conflicts. Any political solution must include detailed tables and a matrix that explain the process of reforms.
A transitional parliament will include all parties and groups, excluding the NCP, and the arrangement will continue for up to 2 years before elections. The agreement will also allow for reform of the security sector and for a civilian-led Security and Defense Council headed by the Prime Minister and including representatives from the army and other security sector elements.
In Mali, 3 United Nations peacekeepers have been killed after their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device in Tessalit in the Kidal region. Speaking to reporters in New York, UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said that the peacekeepers were on a mine search and detection patrol. 3 other peacekeepers were also seriously injured and are receiving treatment in a UN hospital.
But I can already, unfortunately, share with you some more tragic news from Mali, where 3 United Nations peacekeepers died today when their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device in Tessalit in the Kidal region of Mali. The peacekeepers were on a mine search and detection patrol. 3 other peacekeepers were also seriously injured and are receiving treatment in a UN hospital. We send our deepest condolences to the families of the peacekeepers, to our colleagues in the mission, and we wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. This year, already 12 UN peacekeepers were killed in Mali in hostile acts.
Quick follow-up on the attack.
Former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo has celebrated the first anniversary of his political group, African People's Party, Côte d'Ivoire. During a conference marking the occasion in Abidjan, the 77-year-old made a first official comment on the detention of 46 Ivorian soldiers in Mali. He called on President Assimi Goïta, head of the Malian junta, to think about his brotherhood in arms with the Ivorian soldiers who are in prison. The leader of the PPACI party called on the Togolese president, who mediates the crisis, to redouble his efforts to help solve the diplomatic row. The soldiers were accused of being mercenaries and arrested upon arrival in Bamako on July 10. And Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni is planning to invite French President Emmanuel Macron for talks on how to resolve the conflict in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. He believes Europe has nothing to lose if they work well with Africa. DR Congo is battling rebel activity in large swathes of its eastern region. One of the main armed groups there, the M23, has recently made gains against the army to occupy a strategic border town and areas around it in North Kivu province. President Macron last month met the leaders of Rwanda and DR Congo on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. They discussed how to put an end to activities of armed groups in DR Congo. Well, South African state-owned logistics firm Transnet has agreed to a 3-year wage deal with a union representing the majority of its workers, ending a 2-week strike that has hit commodities exports and piled up millions in losses. Union United Transport and Allied Trade Union members who represent more than half of the company's workforce went on strike on October the 6th, demanded an increase linked to South Africa's year-on-year inflation rate, which was 7.6% in August. Transnet said it had agreed on a 6% wage increase for the current financial year. The deal is effective from April 2022. However, a spokesperson for the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union, the minority union, said it had not yet agreed to a deal with Transnet.
For the last few months, you've seen the interest rates going up every month. And for us, it's just a matter of saying, listen here, we want something so that we can afford to pay our house, so that we can afford to pay our bond.
We are not happy, all of us, to be here. We are really struggling. It's the pain. When you see people here out there singing, chanting every day, old, young, it's because they're feeling the pain. They're here for the organization. They're here for their families.
In the meantime, President Cyril Ramaphosa has withdrawn controversial perks for cabinet members and their deputies that saw their homes supplied with free electricity and water. The benefits caused a public outcry as they were considered insensitive at a time South Africans are struggling with daily power cuts and rising cost of living. In a press briefing last night, a spokesman said the president acknowledges and appreciates the public sentiments on the matter. Presidential spokesman Vincent Magwena added that the ministerial handbook, which outlines ministerial benefits, will be aligned to the realities that many South Africans also face. Let's get more on this. Joining us now is our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. Betty, glad to have you on the program. The president has scrapped free electricity and water for cabinet ministers and their deputies. How are South Africans reacting to this?
Well, true. Today, the presidency spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, he announced that recent amendments made by the president to the ministerial handbook would be withdrawn pending a review. Just a bit of a background, the opposition party, the major opposition party, that's the Democratic Alliance, for the past 2 weeks has been drawing attention of the whole country to these amendments, which would some of the perks in the handbook included that ministers and deputy ministers would enjoy unlimited free water and electricity at the official residences and would be allowed to employ more personal staff. This, they say, is somewhat insensitive in a country where there is load shedding, people are struggling with electricity, the cost of it, as well as its availability or the lack of its availability. Also, the issue of water. As I'm speaking with you, they just concluded a press briefing on the issue of lack of water in some areas, including Johannesburg, a major city. The mayor of Johannesburg just spoke to the media on how bad the picture is and how they're hoping for rain. It's not just Johannesburg, other places there's a lack of water supply, and it's a huge challenge. So they're saying taxpayers who are already struggling would be having to pay for the perks, increased perks for the ministers and the deputy ministers, in the midst of everything else, and among other perks that they already enjoy. So Mr. Magwenya announced that the president has ordered the withdrawal of these amendments pending a review, and for now they'll rely on what was there before, the 2019 version of the ministerial handbook. So people are quite happy about that, but it doesn't still solve the problem that they're facing, the hardship.
Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, reporting there for us. The United States Senator has blocked the payment of $75 million in aid to Egypt over human rights concerns. The money, which is subject to a waiver if required reforms are not carried out, was to have been paid by President Joe Biden's administration after Egypt released 500 political prisoners. But with thousands of others still in jail, U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee, insists Egypt needs to do more to improve what he called the deplorable situation facing its political prisoners. The U.S. allocates around $1.13 billion in aid to Egypt annually, much of which has no conditions attached. Meanwhile, the U.S. has blacklisted several individuals in Somalia accused of giving the Islamist Al-Shabaab group financial and other material assistance. Washington says these are parts of a network that has engaged in smuggling weapons from local and foreign sources. This comes a day after the Somali authorities warned businesses in the capital, Mogadishu, against paying taxes to Al-Qaeda affiliates. Al-Shabaab frequently extort businesses in Mogadishu, raising tens of millions of dollars for their militant activities in Somalia and neighboring countries. President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud has declared an all-out war against Al-Shabaab and sought international support to defeat the militants. Last week, the information military suspended dozens of social media accounts and websites for allegedly publishing Al-Shabaab propaganda. Authorities in Ghana are set to block about 10 million SIM cards by the end of this month as the registration window draws to a close. The Communications Authority and industry regulator will, on 31st October, disconnect data and voice services of unverified cards after a year of nationwide registration campaign. In July, the Communication Authority extended the deadline for verification by 2 months to allow Ghanaians and non-citizens resident in the country to link their identity cards to their SIM cards and complete the registration process. The government says the aim of the SIM registration exercise is to protect users against fraud and ensure digital security. A UN expert, Irene Khan, is urging the protection of freedom of expression as a vital survival right of civilians in armed conflict. Briefing reporters following her address to the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly, the Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of Freedom of Opinion and Expression said that the information environment has become a dangerous theater of war in the digital age. Presenting her report, Khan said that state and armed groups enabled by digital technology and social media were weaponizing information to sow confusion.
Historically, information has always been manipulated during war, but now, enabled by digital technology and social media, states, armed groups, and their agents are weaponizing information to sow confusion, feed hate, incite violence, discredit human rights defenders and journalists, and disrupt humanitarian activities, and also prolong conflict. During armed conflict, people are at their most vulnerable and in great need of accurate, trustworthy information. That is precisely when they are being hit now with false or manipulated information, as well as internet shutdowns or slowdowns, information blackouts, and other restrictions. Journalists are a key source of information during conflict, but as you know, journalists are being killed with 90% impunity. For instance, when factual information and independent media are delegitimized as fake news, UN human rights reports are discredited, and patently false state propaganda is promoted as facts.
And over in Chad, a prolonged drought last season was followed by the country's heaviest seasonal rainfall in over 30 years this year. It has left towns and even parts of the capital, N'Djamena, navigable only by boat and forced thousands to flee. Farmlands and pastures are also underwater, leaving the herders with little grazing land.
Chadian nomadic farmer Fatim Chari fends off a hungry calf as she tries to squeeze the last drop of milk from the udder of a 6th cow she's milking.
As you have seen, I tried to milk 6 cows, but I have not managed to get even 1 liter of milk. They are stressed, sick, and malnourished because of the drought and floods. The herds traveled over 2,000 kilometers in a few days to escape the humidity of the floods. And it is difficult for the cows to produce milk for us in these conditions.
Chari, 34, a mother of 4, is in a group of 50 nomads and a herd of about 450 that found refuge in a dry scrubland, approximately 100 kilometers west of the capital, which was some respite for the group. In a normal season, they would take a year to cover around 2,000 kilometers as they move from place to place for grazing. They have just covered that distance in 3 months, fleeing rising waters and humidity.
We subsist on selling milk to the surrounding population, but now there is not even enough to eat. Last year, we saw our cows starve to death before our eyes. This year, we are facing another disaster. We need food and vaccines to preserve our herds, or we will end up losing everything.
Her husband, Adum Malum, says the scrubland where they've sought refuge has no pasture and water for their tired herd that has grown skinny and emaciated. The nomads depend on the milk for their livelihood, like nearly 5 million in the Central African nation of 16.4 million. They're facing acute hunger and in need of food assistance. Back in N'Djamena, local consumers are also feeling the pinch. Milk produced by nomadic herders is getting more difficult to find in markets and in grocery shops.
We want to consume our local dairy products because they are fresh and organic, but they are becoming increasingly rare on the markets. We are forced to consume imported dairy products. They are not well preserved, and they spend months in containers. These imported products create illness such as constipation. But we have no choice because our locally made fresh products are not available.
Authorities in Chad say the heavy rains this year are destroying crop production and potentially creating another food insecurity situation in the coming months.
And finally, Somalia's victorious under-17 national football team has returned home after clinching the East and Central African title at a tournament in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. The teenage Somalis beat their South Sudanese counterparts 3-1 in the final. This is the first time that a Somali football team has won an international competition since the country plunged into civil war in 1991. The victory has brought a rare sense of unity to a conflict-ridden nation. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud welcomed the team to the presidential palace on their arrival in the capital, Mogadishu. In a Facebook post, he also said, "You are a good example for the other Somali youth to follow for their country and to bring successes like this." Well, congratulations to the Somalis. Well, that's it on Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.